This is the story of Daniel Mercer and his wife Hannah Mercer, née Scott. Hannah came into Daniel's life the way a storm announces itself before it arrives, not with thunder, but with a particular stillness in the air, a change in pressure you feel before you understand it. They married in the kind of ceremony that looks effortless in photographs: wild flowers, late afternoon light, 100 people who believed in them. What those photographs couldn't capture was the particular way Hannah held herself throughout the reception, a faint alertness beneath the laughter, as though she were waiting to be disappointed. Daniel noticed it. He told himself it was nerves. It wasn't nerves. It was something older than nerves, older than the two of them. Something her mother had placed inside her like a splinter when she was still young enough to believe everything she was told. This is the story of what happens when a woman is taught to mistake discomfort for love, and what it costs her when, finally, something real arrives. The apartment they shared on Clement Street had good bones, Hannah always said: exposed brick in the kitchen, bay windows that caught the afternoon light and spread it across the hardwood floors in long golden parallelograms. She had arranged it carefully. Vintage rug from an estate sale, bookshelves organized not alphabetically, but by color and then by feeling, a small clay bowl near the door where Daniel dropped his keys every evening at 6:14. She knew the time because she always heard the elevator before she heard the door. This was their 3rd year of marriage, and they had settled into the particular rhythm of two people who have successfully built a life together, which is to say, a rhythm that is genuinely comfortable and also occasionally quietly suffocating. They cooked dinner together on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They watched one television series at a time, agreed in advance, no skipping ahead. On Saturday mornings, Daniel made coffee with the focused seriousness of a man performing a small ritual he found meaningful, and Hannah sat at the kitchen island and watched him and felt something that was either contentment or the early warning signal of something she couldn't name. Daniel Mercer was by most measures a good man. This is not a simple thing to say. Good men are frequently underestimated. People talk about good men the way they talk about reliable cars or sturdy furniture, with appreciation that is fundamentally a little bored. Daniel was 34, a structural engineer, which meant he thought in load-bearing terms, in the relationship between pressure and support, in what holds and what doesn't. He was not flashy. He was not volatile. He did not keep Hannah guessing. When he was upset, he said so calmly and waited. When she was quiet, he gave her space and then, later, asked. She had married him because he was safe. She told herself in the more honest moments that she had also married him because she was tired of the other kind of man, the kind that had occupied her 20s with such exhausting drama that she had arrived at 30 with the emotional bruising of someone who has survived something they chose to enter freely. But safety, she was discovering, had a texture she hadn't anticipated. On this particular Tuesday in October, they were making pasta. Hannah was at the stove and Daniel was behind her at the island, slicing bread, and the radio was on low, some jazz station he liked that she'd stopped pretending to enjoy, and the scene was so domestically complete that it made her feel, briefly, like an actor in someone else's life. Olivia texted, Hannah said, keeping her eyes on the pot. What did she want? Just checking in. She's back from Portland. Daniel made a neutral sound. He had no strong feelings about Olivia Crane, Hannah's friend from her earlier years, the ones she didn't discuss in detail. Olivia was loud and opinionated and wore her hair in a different style every time Daniel saw her, which was infrequent enough that it remained mildly disorienting. Are you going to see her? Maybe Thursday. I thought we were. I know. I'll move it. He didn't push. This was the thing about Daniel. He didn't push, and Hannah sometimes wished, with a low and shameful frequency, that he would, that he'd say no, stay, I want you here, with some edge to it. Instead, he said, it's fine, and returned to the bread, and the moment folded closed without incident. Later, when they were eating, he reached across the table and touched the back of her hand, not a significant gesture. Just contact, brief and warm, the kind of thing that accumulates meaning over years. She looked at his hand on hers and felt something she couldn't immediately classify. She thought about calling her mother. She didn't. Outside, the city carried on in its indifferent way, and the candle on the table burned steadily, and Hannah watched the flame and tried to remember the last time she had felt the specific electricity of not knowing what someone would do next. She remembered it very clearly. That was the problem. Olivia Crane had what Hannah privately thought of as a talent for a rival. She entered rooms and restaurants and conversations with the same quality of minor disruption, never dramatic, but always slightly rearranging the air. She was 41 now and looked somehow younger than she had at 35, as though she had made a private decision about aging and it had agreed to comply. They met at a wine bar on Hayes Street, one of those narrow places with exposed filament bulbs and a chalkboard menu and the pleasant low noise of a Wednesday evening crowd. You look tired, Olivia said, without preamble, sitting down across from Hannah. Thank you, Olivia. I don't mean it badly. I mean it observationally. Hannah picked up her glass. I'm fine. How was Portland? I met someone. Of course you did. Olivia smiled, not with triumph, but with the particular satisfaction of a woman who understands herself well enough to stop being surprised by her own patterns. He's a disaster. Incredible, but a disaster. She said this with no discernible regret. You know the type. Hannah did know the type. This was, in some ways, the foundational text of their friendship, a shared fluency in that specific kind of man. The kind who generates heat the way a fire generates heat, necessary seeming and destructive in equal measure. Are you happy? Hannah asked. Probably not long term, but right now? Olivia shrugged. I feel alive. Hannah looked at the candle on the table. Different restaurant, same candle, same flame, she thought, and felt vaguely absurd. How's Daniel? Good. He's good. Olivia waited, which was its own form of pressure. We're good. He made reservations last week for our anniversary dinner. He remembered the place we went on our first date, made them months in advance. Hannah paused. He's very thoughtful. That sounds nice, Olivia said in a tone that was carefully, precisely, neither endorsement nor criticism. It is nice. Okay, I mean it. Hannah. Olivia set down her glass. I didn't say anything. The thing about conversations with Olivia was that the most significant exchange frequently happened in the negative space, in what was agreed not to say, in the silences that both women understood and neither confirmed. Hannah knew this, and still she kept walking into those silences. My mother called last week, Hannah said. She asked if I was she phrased it as still interested in Daniel. Like he was something I'd ordered online and wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then, what did you say? I said, of course. Hannah turned her glass slowly, and then she said, you don't sound excited. And I said I didn't know that excitement was a long-term marital requirement, and she laughed like I'd said something funny. Her mother, Sandra Scott, was 64 and had been divorced twice, once from Hannah's father, whose primary offense had been a gentle temperament and a reliable paycheck, and once from a man named Victor who had been, by all external evidence, electrifyingly awful and toward whom Sandra still occasionally spoke with a warmth that baffled and infuriated Hannah even now. Date bad boys for the thrill, baby, Sandra had said, not once, but repeatedly, in the car on the way to school, at the kitchen table, on the phone during Hannah's college years. Nice men are for later, or maybe never, depends on what you want from a life. Hannah had spent her 20s conducting what she now understood to be an extended experiment in her mother's thesis. She had the results. I keep thinking, Hannah said, and then stopped. Thinking what? Never mind. She picked up her glass. It's stupid. Olivia looked at her for a moment, and here something strange happened. Something that would be difficult to explain later. Olivia's expression shifted, took on an unusual quality, as though she had become briefly aware of something outside the conversation, some wider context or audience she had not previously noticed. She looked almost directly past Hannah, into the middle distance, and said, in a slightly different register, lower and more hesitant, I don't know, maybe like this story or subscribe or something. Hannah stared at her. What? Olivia blinked. The odd quality dissolved. Nothing? Sorry, I don't. Forget it. She shook her head, looking mildly embarrassed. What were you saying? I? Hannah studied her friend's face. What was that? Genuinely no idea. Go on. Hannah waited another moment, then let it pass, the way you let the inexplicable pass when you're in the middle of something more pressing. I keep thinking, she started again, that I trained myself to want the wrong thing for so long that I don't know how to want the right one. And I'm afraid that eventually Daniel will notice that I'm holding something back, some register of feeling I can't access with him, and I don't know if that's his failing or mine or just. She stopped. Or just damage. Olivia was quiet, not uncomfortably, the considerate kind of quiet. That's not stupid, she finally said. It feels stupid. Most true things do. They sat with that for a while. The wine bar hummed around them. Hannah watched a couple at the next table. The man was saying something and the woman was laughing, head back, unguarded. And she tried to remember the last time she had laughed like that with Daniel, unguarded, fully there. She could remember times, they were just not recent. On the walk home, the city smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet, and Hannah felt the old familiar restlessness that she had learned, over years, to diagnose accurately. It was not boredom with Daniel. It was something she carried inside herself that no specific person had ever been able to resolve, not even the ones who had seemed most capable of igniting her. She just hadn't known, for a very long time, what to do with that distinction. She told Daniel on a Sunday. Not everything. That would be imprecise. She told him a version of what was true, which was the version she could manage without fully dismantling herself. They were on the couch, the gray afternoon pressing against the windows, and Hannah said, without particular ceremony, I've been feeling disconnected lately, from us. Daniel set down his book. He did this carefully, with the same attentiveness he brought to most things, and looked at her. Okay, he said. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not sure I can explain it clearly. Can you try? She appreciated that he asked without defensiveness. She also found it, in some parallel register of herself she didn't fully control, faintly aggravating that he was so composed, so willing, so reasonable about this. She recognized this as an irrational response, and recognized equally that naming it as irrational didn't make it less real. I feel like I'm watching our life instead of being in it, she said. Like I'm a little bit outside everything, including you. Daniel was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was thinking rather than retreating. Has this been recent, or I don't know when it started? This was partially true. Maybe it's me. I think it's probably me, Hannah. What? You don't have to pre-absolve me of the right to be hurt by saying it's you. She looked at him. I wasn't trying to do that. I know you weren't trying to. He picked up his book and set it on the side table. Is there something specific? Something I've done? Or is it the apartment? It's not the apartment? Is it something I haven't done? He said this without self-pity, which somehow made it harder to hear. I know I can get absorbed in work. I know I'm not always expressive in the ways that Daniel. She turned toward him. You're very expressive. You're one of the most emotionally consistent people I've ever known. He absorbed this. That doesn't sound like a compliment the way you said it, she breathed. I don't mean it as a criticism. I genuinely don't. She pressed her hands together in her lap. I think I have patterns that are older than you, older than us. Things I was taught to want that aren't good for me, and I've been unpacking that. And sometimes the unpacking makes me feel distant even from the things that are actually good. He watched her for a long moment. Outside, the first rain began, not dramatically, just a soft insistence against the windows. You grew up being told that love was supposed to feel a certain way, he said. It was not a question. Yes, and that way involved a certain kind of person. Yes, and I'm not that kind of person. No, you're not. And you're not sure. I'm not saying I'm not sure about you. She said this urgently and found she meant it. I'm saying I'm not sure about myself. Those are different things. Daniel looked at the rain on the window. He had the expression he wore when he was working through a structural problem. Not distress exactly, but focus. A kind of careful taking stock. What do you need from me? He asked. The simplicity of this nearly broke her. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded. He didn't say let me know in a dismissive way. He just nodded, as if filing the information carefully, as if it mattered, as if he would carry it and hold it until she had something more to give him. They sat together in the gray afternoon for a while longer, not touching, but not apart either. The rain collected on the windowsill. Daniel eventually made tea, 2 cups, without asking, and set one on the table in front of her, and returned to his side of the couch. The distance between them was real. It was also, Hannah thought, different from the distance she'd known before. It wasn't the toxic space that men like the ones in her past had generated, the silence designed to destabilize, the absence used as leverage. It was just 2 people trying to find honest language for something that resisted it. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She thought, this is what I was taught to call boring. She thought, my mother was wrong about so many things. He moved to the guest room in November. Not dramatically. There was no argument that precipitated it. No door slamming, no delivered ultimatum. Hannah suggested it actually. She said she thought they might both sleep better, that the closeness at night had started to feel like a kind of pressure she couldn't explain, that she needed to think. Daniel had looked at her for a moment and then agreed, and carried his pillow and 2 books down the hall, and that was that. They still had dinner together most evenings. This surprised her, and she suspected it surprised him too, though neither of them said so. There was something in the arrangement. 2 people separated by 40 feet of corridor, sharing meals, still talking, that felt more honest than much of what had preceded it. The pretense had been cleared away. What remained was harder to name. Hannah called her mother in December on a gray Tuesday, sitting in her car outside the grocery store. Sandra answered on the second ring with the particular bright efficiency she deployed when she was at least somewhat happy with herself. I need to ask you something, Hannah said. Ask. Did you actually believe it, what you always told me about? She searched for the right word. About the kind of men worth wanting. A pause. What's brought the sun? Just answer it. Another pause, longer this time with some weight in it. I believed it for a while, Sandra finally said. I think I believed it specifically while I was with your father, because it was easier to make a philosophy out of restlessness than to admit I just wasn't built for calm. I was young, I was bored. I made a whole system out of it. A small sound that might have been a laugh or something else. I didn't mean to pass the system on. But you did. Yes, Sandra said quietly. I did. Hannah sat in the parking lot for a while after they hung up. Outside, people moved between cars with grocery bags, purposeful and unexamined. She watched them without quite seeing them. She had spent 15 years believing that intensity was a property of love, that to feel love was to feel it as a kind of emergency, a pulling away from equilibrium. She had believed this so thoroughly that calm had come to read as absence. She had needed disruption the way someone with a faulty nervous system needs strong stimuli just to register sensation at all. She understood this now, with the kind of clarity that arrives not as revelation but as belated recognition. Oh, of course, I've always known this. Daniel, in the months of their careful not quite separation, had done something she hadn't anticipated. He hadn't withdrawn. He hadn't punished her with silence or distance or the passive erosion she had come to expect from men when their ego required it. He had simply remained. He was there, steady, a presence that made no demands and held no grudges, bringing her tea in the mornings when he saw her light on, leaving the journal she'd been looking for on the kitchen counter, saying goodnight across the hallway with a quiet that was not cold. She had started to cry one evening in January, unexpectedly, over nothing she could name, sitting at the kitchen table with an unopened book. And he had come in and sat with her, not asked what was wrong, not fixed, just sat, his hand on the table near hers. not quite touching. She had thought, this is what I was trying to destroy. This is what I would have walked away from in my 20s and called it self preservation. She had started seeing a therapist in January, Dr. Renata Solis, who worked from an office with plants on every surface and who had a way of asking questions that felt less like inquiry and more like excavation. Hannah found it uncomfortable in the way that useful things are frequently uncomfortable. You were trained, Dr. Solis said one afternoon, to experience safety as a threat. So your nervous system registers a calm, attentive partner as incorrect, as insufficient. The feeling is real. The interpretation is the problem. I know that now, Hannah said. I've known it for a while. Knowing and believing are different processes. I know that too, Hannah said. That one's taking longer. What she didn't say to the therapist, because she wasn't sure yet how to hold it without breaking it, was that something had begun to shift. A slow thing, tectonic, without announcement. She had started to notice Daniel differently. The way he spoke about his work with quiet pride, the way he laughed at things that were genuinely funny and didn't perform amusement for social lubrication, the way he had given her space and also stayed, the two things simultaneously, which she had always assumed were mutually exclusive. She was, she thought, beginning to learn a different language. Whether it was too late to speak, it was the question she carried into spring. The last real conversation happened on a Saturday in April. They had both come home at similar times by coincidence and stood briefly in the entrance in their coats, one of those small, domestic corridor moments. Daniel was holding a bat from the hardware store. Hannah was holding her keys, having just remembered she'd come in without anything to deliver. Are you hungry? He asked. A little. I can make something. This was, Hannah reflected later, perhaps the most ordinary sentence she had ever loved. They ate at the kitchen table, pasta he'd made quickly and well, with the particular ease of someone cooking for pleasure rather than performance. They talked about a podcast she'd been listening to, about a problem he'd been working through at a site upstate, about whether they should get a plant for the window that kept attracting pigeons. It was the kind of conversation that doesn't constitute a scene. Nothing could be extracted from it and placed in a story about damage or repair. It was just two people at a table, speaking easily. Afterward, she helped clear. He washed, she dried. The kitchen was quiet in a good way. She put away the last glass and stood with her back to the counter, watching him finish at the sink. Daniel. He turned. She had rehearsed this in various versions over several months. She had imagined it as a speech, as an apology, as an explanation. She'd imagined herself arriving at some perfect, articulate accounting of what she understood now that she hadn't before, and how she had arrived at it, and what she wanted it to mean. What she said was, I've been learning something. He waited, drying his hands on the dish towel. About the difference between what I was taught love should feel like and what it actually is. She held the edge of the counter behind her. I know I've been distant. I know I've been. She stopped. I was trying to want you differently than I did. And what I should have been doing was learning to trust the way I actually did. He was looking at her carefully, not with hope exactly, something more cautious than hope, more honest. I don't know if there's still room, she said. I'm not asking you to tell me it's all fine or that nothing happened. I just needed you to know that I see it, what I almost let go of. The kitchen held the particular quiet of a room that has absorbed a great deal over many months. Daniel set the dish towel on the counter. He did not cross the room. He did not fold her into his arms in the way that stories end. He stood where he was and looked at her with a kind of expression that is too layered to name. Not forgiveness, not refusal, not quite either. Something in the vicinity of honest regard. I know you see it, he said. I've seen you seeing it. She breathed. I don't want you to be with me because you've decided I'm sufficient, he said. I want. He paused. I need it to be something other than that. It is something other than that. I'm not sure how to. He looked at the window. I'm not sure how I know. They stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, two people who had not destroyed what they had, who had not saved it either, who were standing in the territory between, which has no good name in any language but which is, perhaps, the most human place of all. Later that night, Hannah sat at the edge of her bed, still the guest room, not resolved, not rushed, and thought about her mother, and her mother's mother, and the long inheritance of women who had learned to call chaos by the name of passion and stillness by the name of death. She thought about Dr. Solis and what she'd said about knowing versus believing. She thought about Daniel in the kitchen, the dish towel, the careful way he held his feelings without sealing them off. She didn't know what would happen. That was the truth of it, real and unperformed and less comfortable than any ending she might have designed. She did not know if they would find their way back to the same room, the same bed, the same life, restructured for something more honest. She did not know if what she was learning would arrive in time, but she knew this. She had stopped waiting to be interrupted by something that felt like emergency, and that, small as it seemed, quiet as it arrived, was not nothing. It was, in fact, exactly where it started. The light from the hallway came under her door in a thin gold line. She sat with it for a while. She did not call her mother. She did not reach for her phone. She just sat with the particular and unfamiliar weight of a woman beginning at 36 to want the right things in the right way, and understanding, with a clarity that cost her something to hold, how long she had taken to get there. Outside, the city carried on. Spring had arrived without asking permission, the way it always does, indifferent to the private rearrangements of the people inside.